Rain poured so hard that night in Ohio it felt like the sky had cracked open, and for a moment, Marcus almost kept driving. He had just finished a 14-hour shift at the warehouse outside Columbus. His back ached, his knuckles were scraped raw from loading freight, and the only thing on his mind was getting home to his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. Ever since his wife, Jenna, had passed away 2 years earlier from a sudden aneurysm, every day felt like a battle he was barely winning. Some nights he wondered how much longer he could keep the house, the job, the routine that barely held their broken little world together. And then he saw her. A sleek black sedan sat crooked on the shoulder of Interstate 71, hazard lights blinking weakly against the storm. A woman stood beside it, drenched, hair plastered to her face, one hand gripping her phone like it had betrayed her. Cars flew past without slowing. Marcus hesitated. What if he was late picking Sophie up from his sister Rachel's? What if this was dangerous? What if helping meant losing the little stability he still had? And what would you have done? Kept driving, telling yourself someone else would stop? Or pulled over, even when your own life already felt like too much? He pulled over. Up close, she looked nothing like the polished, confident type he usually associated with expensive cars. She looked exhausted. Scared. Her name was Victoria, she said, her voice tight with frustration. She'd been driving back from Cleveland to Columbus after a last-minute meeting when her car overheated. Her phone battery was nearly dead, and roadside assistance had a 2-hour delay because of the storm. Marcus wasn't a mechanic, but he knew enough. He popped the hood, rain soaking through his t-shirt, and did what he could. He offered her the old umbrella he kept in his truck. She tried to insist she'd be fine, but her hands were trembling. He called Rachel to say he'd be late. Sophie would stay the night. His sister didn't complain, but Marcus heard the tiredness in her voice. He hated feeling like a burden. After nearly 40 minutes in the rain, he managed to stabilize the engine enough for short-distance driving. He followed Victoria in his truck to a small gas station off the next exit. By then, it was past 10 p.m. The station's repair shop was closed until morning. Without thinking too much about it, Marcus offered to drive her to a nearby motel and come back in the morning to check on the car. She hesitated, studying him. He probably looked rough, muddy boots, faded jeans, an old Ford with rust creeping along the doors. But something in his tired eyes must have convinced her. He dropped her off and refused the money she tried to press into his hand. Just pay it forward, he said quietly, though he didn't think she would. The next morning, he brought Sophie with him to the gas station before heading to work. Sophie chattered the whole way, asking if the rain lady was okay. Victoria was already there, standing beside the car, this time dressed in a tailored navy suit, her blonde hair styled neatly, as if the storm had never happened. When Sophie ran up and hugged Marcus's leg, Victoria's face softened in a way he hadn't expected. He introduced them. Sophie showed Victoria the drawing she'd made that morning, 3 stick figures under a giant umbrella. It turned out the car needed a new radiator. The part wouldn't arrive for 2 days. Victoria looked genuinely distressed, glancing at her watch, then at her phone. She asked Marcus if he knew any reliable rental places nearby. He offered to drive her to one before work. Over the next 2 days, they kept running into each other. Victoria insisted on repaying him. Marcus kept brushing it off. He learned she was in town for business but lived in Chicago. She learned that he had once studied business administration at Ohio State before dropping out to work full-time when Jenna got sick. He didn't talk much about Jenna. But when Victoria asked gently one afternoon, something in him cracked open. He told her about hospital bills, about selling their second car, about sitting in a sterile room holding Jenna's hand as machines hummed around them. He told her how Sophie still asked when mommy was coming home. Victoria didn't offer empty comfort. She just listened, eyes shining. On the third day, When the car was finally fixed, she asked if she could visit his workplace before leaving town. Marcus laughed awkwardly. The warehouse wasn't impressive. It was loud, dusty, and smelled like oil and cardboard. But she insisted. When she walked through the warehouse doors that afternoon, conversation slowly quieted. Victoria didn't look out of place. She looked purposeful. Confident. Different. Marcus felt a strange unease in his chest. An hour later, his supervisor, Harold, called him into the office. Victoria was already seated inside. That was when he learned the truth. Victoria wasn't just in town for business. She was the CEO of a rapidly expanding logistics company based in Chicago. And the warehouse Marcus worked at? It was one of the regional facilities her company had quietly acquired 6 months earlier. She had been traveling unannounced, visiting locations without revealing her identity to see how things truly operated. She had planned to observe from a distance. She hadn't planned on breaking down in a storm. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He replayed every conversation in his head. Every complaint he had made about long hours. Every joke about upper management not caring about workers. Heat rushed to his face. But Victoria's expression wasn't cold or offended. It was thoughtful. She spoke about integrity. About character. She told Harold that in 3 days, she had seen more leadership in Marcus' patience, responsibility, compassion than she had in some managers she'd hired on paper for impressive resumes. She had reviewed his file. High productivity. No disciplinary issues. Perfect attendance, even after his wife's death. She offered him a position in operations training, with a salary increase that made his head spin. It would mean classes again. Responsibility. Risk. Marcus thought about Sophie. About hospital bills still stacked in a drawer at home. About the fear that had followed him for 2 years like a shadow. What if stepping forward meant failing? What if he wasn't enough? And what would you choose, standing at the edge of something bigger than your fear? He accepted. The months that followed weren't easy. He studied at night after putting Sophie to bed. He struggled with spreadsheets and logistics software. There were moments he nearly gave up, feeling too old, too tired, too behind. But Victoria checked in not as a distant executive, but as someone who remembered a stormy night and a man who had chosen kindness over convenience. Slowly, Marcus found confidence he thought he'd buried with Jenna. He began managing small teams. Then larger ones. He implemented safety improvements he had once complained about. He listened to workers the way Victoria had listened to him. A year later, he stood in a renovated facility in Dayton as regional operations manager. Sophie, now 7, wore a tiny blazer and told everyone her dad was the boss of the boxes. On the anniversary of Jenna's passing, Marcus visited her grave with Sophie. He told her everything about the storm, about Victoria, about the job. About hope returning in ways he hadn't expected. Sometimes life doesn't change because of grand plans. Sometimes it changes because you stopped in the rain for someone who needed help. Before this story ends, tell me in the comments, have you ever helped someone without knowing how it might come back to you? Marcus still keeps that old umbrella in his truck. It's torn along one edge now, barely usable. But he won't throw it away. Because every time he looks at it, he remembers that even in the worst storms, the smallest act of kindness can rewrite a life. If this story truly touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe only if you believe kindness still has the power to change the world.